Hey, welcome to Pro Mindset Podcast today. This is your host, Craig Doman. We're going to have a great show today. Today, our special guest is Erik Jernstrom. Erik is from EForce Sports. He's the director of sports performance. He trains professional athletes, college athletes, high school athletes, the gamut. They have a holistic approach to how they do their business. Erik, welcome to Pro Mindset today.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
All right, big man, speak up just a little bit because it's a little bit low on volume.
Easy.
Okay, so Erik, EForce Sports. What makes you guys, tell us what you do and tell us why you're different.
Yeah, sure. So essentially EForce Sports is a multi-sport company. So we have multiple divisions, whether it be baseball, basketball, football, sports medicine, sports performance, lacrosse, or adult fitness, all captured under one roof with our underlying principle of long-term athlete development, meaning whether we're working with you at a youth level all the way to professional level, we leverage the long-term athlete development framework to apply age-appropriate and biologically appropriate training to maximize your athletic potential with us. And that transcends not just sports performance of strength and conditioning, speed, power, and all those things, but also skill development as well. And so what our goal is to put all of those things under one roof. So someone doesn't have to go see a PT at one facility, train with me for speed, power, strength at another, then meet a coach somewhere else, and everybody's on different timelines and not communicating. So imagine an NFL or a college model applied to the private sector and then scaled based off of age and talent level.
Okay, I get all that. That sounds fantastic. Explain to me a little bit more what you mean by long-term athlete health.
Yeah, sure. So long-term athlete development is a framework that recognizes that depending on how old you are, both biologically, so your age 1, 2, 3, 4, but also your maturation age, so where you are in terms of when you turn, go through puberty, you have different windows of trainability or windows of adaptability to train different qualities to maximize your athletic development. So younger kids work more physical literacy and movement skills, where older kids start to get introduced into the weight room, build generalized speed, power, and strength, where our elite level athletes are executing and applying the most complex, most intensified training programs to allow someone to maximize their potential, not just here in the moment, but across their entire athlete lifespan. So we're not just trying to get the third grader to be the best third grader, but we're trying to slow cook the process so they end up being the best X player that they can be, whatever level they exit at.
Okay, so let's focus on the pro elite athlete just for the moment. How does this apply to those guys? I mean, it's like these guys want to get ready for the next season. They've got to recover. They want to improve their movement skills.
Right.
They may feel like they have some weaknesses in certain places. How do you focus? How do you build your plan around Cooper Kupp and some of the people that you've worked with?
Yeah, so we talk about reverse engineering the process. So first and foremost, we look at what the position and the game demands are for those athletes. In the best version of this, when a professional athlete, say a football player, comes in to work with us, not only do we do extensive interviews with them about what success means to them, what their play style is, we watch film together if we can about how they move and how they execute, but we also try to connect with their staff. So whether it be, say, the Rams staff in this example, to look at what their training program's like, the things that they deem are important qualities or KPIs, key performance indicators. And then from there, we build out our programs to address those qualities. Because at the end of the day, at the very highest level with these NFL guys, what we're doing is a support to playing the sport. Like at the young level, these kids, if they get faster, they'll probably be a better football player. But at the highest level possible, the NFL level, what we're doing is we're trying to build a fitness that allows them to practice their sport and their skill at the highest volume, frequency, and intensity to accelerate and maintain skill mastery. Because at that level, really the only thing that transfers to playing football is playing football. And so we want to make them resilient enough to play football with the most volume, frequency, intensity possible to master their craft, or what we'd call sports mastery.
Where do most professional athletes fail between volume and let's just take an athlete's getting ready for training camp, and let's just stick to football just for the moment.
Yeah.
Is it a lack of intensity in their training? Is it a lack of volume? Or is it a lack of frequency? It's probably not a lack of frequency. They're doing the work.
Right.
What is it, in your opinion?
That's a great question. And so I'll use this as an example. Most of the athletes who make it to the NFL survive. They don't thrive in their training, meaning they have the genetic potential to make it there regardless. So they could be put through some of the worst training modalities possible, but because they are so genetically gifted, they're going to survive those training modalities, and they may not get put through optimal. And because in the United States, we have such a dense population of talent, we can burn as many athletes as we need to get the one that makes it to the 1,500 guys who play on Sundays. Because think about that. We only need 1,500 guys to play on Sundays. How many youth football players are there? How many college football players are there? So we can burn as many as we need to get those couple really good ones. And people self-select to play in the NFL because there's a lot behind it. There's incentive to do so. So the most genetically gifted organically end up down that realm. So I say that to say, where we mess up, or where I see it get messed up, is that people think that their process is good, but really what they're doing is just working with really highly genetically gifted talent, and it makes their process look good. What we do is we leverage an understanding of biology and physiology to be able to maximize adaptation based off of where these guys are at. And so we leverage this idea that hard work isn't always meaningful, and meaningful work isn't always hard. And so really where most people mess up is they go too hard, too often, too frequently, which allows them, or what leads them to burning the candle at both ends and minimizing their ability to be a high performer, because they're always carrying a significant amount of fatigue and they're never actually recovering from the work that they're doing. So ironically enough, some of the best athletes I have do some of the lowest volumes of speed, power, strength training, but make the biggest adaptations because they're actually recovering and adapting to the work that we're doing. We're not just grinding them to grind them. They're Ferraris. They're not daily drivers. They're not a Prius built to go, 100,000 miles or whatever it is. They're built to race on Sundays and get repaired just like a Formula One car is.
No, you sound like a Formula One mechanic right now, based upon how you're talking. And I love the idea that most NFL guys, survive, because I think they do. And unless you're one of the core 5 or 10 guys on a roster, the team doesn't really care. Right. Because there's somebody sitting at home that's working harder than the guys that are in the building, that's chomping at the bit for that opportunity. And that's why especially teams that are struggling right now in the NFL are churning their rosters. They're signing 3 or 4 new guys almost every week. And then you got an organization like Detroit that's rocking, and they're not making any changes. They feel like they got their guys in the building. Unless somebody gets hurt, they're not making any changes. Where the Cardinals and the Panthers and some of those teams that are struggling at the moment, they're making a lot of changes. So is it fair to say that you're almost of the mindset that working smarter is better than working harder?
I think to work as hard as you possibly can and to get the biggest return on investment, you have to work smart. They're not mutually exclusive. It's not one or the other. It's both.
It's both.
You got to pick when to work hard. You work really hard, and then you recover from it so that you can be set up to work really hard again. And what people
Let's
don't
talk mindset for a moment.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm sorry, Eric. I want to pivot for a second. Let's talk about mindset. So you got a guy like Kupp, whose grandfather played in the NFL, his dad played in the NFL, and he dreamed of being a Hall of Famer before he got to the NFL. His goal before he went to the NFL was to have a gold jacket when he was done.
Right.
Okay. I interviewed him. I talked to him. Great young man. Very few people have that kind of mindset. How do you feel like the mindset plays into the total curriculum of getting an athlete ready for performance, getting him ready for training camp, getting him ready for, 22, 25 games if they play preseason and playoffs? How does that come into play?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just kind of hit the nail on the head, right? Like you have to be able to have a long-term mindset, and lining up that long-term mindset means that you got to set up to recognize what I'm doing today is not going to mess me up for what I got to do tomorrow or in the future, right? We're kind of playing the long game here. And so, for a guy like that, I think one, specifically, he's extremely intrinsically motivated. He loves football at a level that if you didn't get paid for it and there weren't the accolades behind it, he'd still want to do it. And what we've seen in research, psychological research and motivation-based research, is those with the highest levels of intrinsic motivation have the least likelihood of burnout and the highest likelihood of long-term success and achievement. And so those are things that you can't innately teach. That is like a passion for the game that is extended beyond any external motivation. And so I think the underpinning quality that I see in the most high-level performers who perform at the highest level for the most consistent amount of efforts are that they have that internal kind of innate drive to be great and that intrinsic motivation, so to speak. I think once you have that,
I agree with that.
Yeah, I think once you have that, then it's building the understanding of what a high performance lifestyle is to support those goals. And that's where he's really smart. And he leverages not thinking he is the subject matter expert, but leaning into subject matter experts in unique fields that will support him in his task. So you lean into the sports psychologist, the sports med doctor, the sports performance coach, the sports skill coach to support you as subject matter experts to build this athlete in totality.
Let's take a step back and let's go back to 10, 12, 14 years of age. When a young athlete is in that stage of their career, they're in middle school, they're in high school. They may have a tremendous amount of athleticism. They may have above average athleticism, but have that intrinsic drive to be the best despite their genes.
Yeah.
How do parents sometimes unintentionally harm their kids in that very critical space where they're trying to figure out, do I really want to do this? I got better options. I go hang out with my friends. I could not have to work as hard. I don't have to sacrifice my weekends and all these different things that kids today have options.
Right.
How do parents help or hurt their kids in that situation?
Well, I think it's a few things. I think one, in terms of being able to help your kids, you need to be able to be supportive from the sideline, so to speak, to be able to allow them to be an agent to make their own decisions, but remind them of the effort it's going to take. Not make them do it, but remind them of it so that they remember their choices. So, what we talk about a lot with these kids is, hey, I'm a high school kid and I have a goal of playing Division I. Okay, there's a certain amount of investment. I don't like the term sacrifice because it makes it seem like you're giving something up, when in reality, you're just prioritizing what's important to get to where you want to go from what you've told us is important, right? So as opposed to thinking of something as a sacrifice, because there's a lot of negative connotation to that, we just like to say, let's reorganize a high performance lifestyle that aligns with what your goals are. And then I'm going to hold you accountable to those goals, but also understand that at the end of the day, you're the one who's going to have to do the sets, the reps, the early mornings, and things like that. So we know what it takes to get there. I will outline that path for you. I will support you in that path and encourage you in that path. But at the end of the day, you also have the agency to say it's too much or it's done whenever I want to. But I think not allowing kids to take ownership, even at the extent that maybe they fail or that they slip or that they lose sight of it, is one big issue that I see often where, I'm not saying that you shouldn't push your kid, or when he doesn't feel like doing it, you should try to get him to do it anyways to build that, resiliency, so to speak. But I also think at some point, if every time you have to wake your kid up to go do the workout, if every time you have to drag your kid to the practice, the question then becomes, is it his goal or is it your goal? Right? So you got to do really good at asking your kids what their goals are, holding them accountable to their goals, and then highlighting if they are or aren't meeting the standard. And when they aren't, just like anything else, you have a performance review and say, hey, is this still your goal? If so, you're not meeting the standard for the roadmap that we know that it's going to take. Do you still want to achieve this goal and do you still want to work towards it? Okay, let's realign our focus, or let's readjust our goal. Neither of those are bad things. Because that's the other thing is, I think that the other way parents get in the way is when a kid says, I want to play Division I football, and the parent wants to live so vicariously through them that the kid loses like the option to feel like they could change their mind. And now they feel an obligation to live this out on behalf of their parents, as opposed to saying like, I don't know if I really like the game like that anymore, or I'm passionate about something else, but I don't want to let my parents down, even though it's, kind of their life to live. So I think it's holding their hand too much through the process. And then I think it's not giving them the opportunity to have an exit strategy if it's something that they aren't passionate about.
Amen, brother. Well, I have, and we don't know each other. We were introduced. I have a son that plays Power 5 football. He's a QB2 at Louisville.
Nice.
Played 10 games last year. He's only played 2 this year. And QB2's got to be one of the hardest positions on the planet. When you're in the NFL, it's an awesome position. You get to wear a baseball hat like I've got, and you get to get paid, and you don't get hit.
Right.
But QB2 in college is not a lot of fun. And then I have another son that's in between jobs in the NFL. He made it last year as a rookie, got hurt in preseason game this year, and he's had 6 workouts and just got called by a team this morning. The bottom line is I always gave them the option to exit stage left whenever they wanted to. And I always, and when I say always, I mean it. I let them, we have a little problem here. Eric, you ran out of storage. Do you see that? Let's restart the browser. Jose, are you available? Boy, that's a new one. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears because I was going down a road and I've already forgotten where I was going on that one.
No, I appreciate that.
The bottom line is I've always given my sons the opportunity to exit stage left and told them how hard it was going to be. And no matter how hard they thought it was going to be harder than that. And that it was okay if they didn't want to play anymore, because football is not a fun sport except on game days. I mean, it's like, yes, practice is fun, making big plays is fun, but the grind of it really kind of tears guys down. And if you think you have to do it, you're not going to perform your best.
Right.
When you can always hit the eject button, then you can be free to perform your best. The second thing I wanted to kind of hit on was, you probably don't know much about Pro Mindset, but Pro Mindset has a framework that is predicated upon how do you perform your best in the biggest moments. And what supports it and the foundation of it is your high performance systems, your habits, it's your standards. And then what is behind that is who you are. Discovering who you are. What is your story? What is your narrative? What are your beliefs? How do you see yourself? And so most people don't talk about that third one. They focus on the systems, and the systems are critical. But once you've got fantastic high performance systems, which I break down into what is your purpose, what is your process, and can you produce a movie of you doing it before you do it? So you've thrown the pass, you've completed the pass in your mind before you've thrown the pass. You've won the game before it starts. And in that process part, so you got your purpose, which is connected to who you are. You got your process is what you do, and that's a big part of what you guys do. It's your preparation, it's your practice, it's your pit crew. It's all those things that help you have a higher volume of capability to do what you do. But if you can't see yourself doing it, you can have the ability to do it, but it doesn't show up when it needs to, because you don't have the belief. So what my discovery in the last handful of years has been, what's your story? Because your story limits your performance. It limits your success, or it drives it. And we really don't talk about what your story is. We don't even know how to even discuss it. We don't even know how to start it. We don't know most athletes, when you ask them what their story is, they don't even know what it means. But I will say that once you've got those high performance systems in place, your story's everything. So going back to Cooper Kupp, his story is he's loved the game and he's wanted to be one of the best ever. When he ends up at a FCS school, it didn't matter. And he goes in the league and does what he's done. It's no surprise to the people that really know what he's about. Fair?
Yeah, very much so.
Right? And then the other part of it is, I talk about, on the performance side, building a performance container, and I call it a performance bubble, that you bring everything that serves you to that competition, and everything that doesn't serve you, you don't bring with you. So you bring your belief, you bring your confidence, you bring your preparation, you bring your practice, you bring everything, you bring your recovery. But your fears and doubts, you don't bring with you. Any previous failures, you don't bring with you. The media says something about, you don't bring that with you. And so you've got this protective shield that you operate in on game day. You don't let anything in there that doesn't belong in there. And it better be full of belief in yourself, not in what you do. Confidence is, in my opinion, is about what you do. Belief is about who you are. You better be 100%er when you walk in there. Because if you are, guess what the fruits of that exercise are? You play free. You have no pressure. You're detached from the outcome of the game, the outcome of the play. Might be an opportunity in the playoffs to go to the Super Bowl. If you're thinking about the Super Bowl, you can't make the play.
Right.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think 100%. I would agree with a lot of those things. And I think at that very last point, I think another way to say that is just being present, right? People make sense of the feelings of sadness, sorrow, or helplessness is living in the past, where the feelings of anxiousness or anxiety is kind of living too far in the future. And the kind of balance or symbiotic relationship is living in the present. And when you can live in the present and you can be where your boots are, you can change the circumstances for the better, more often than not. That's our goal, obviously, for the outcome that we're trying to work towards. So, I think the belief in yourself and then being where your boots are right now and living in the present are two driving factors that I see in a lot of guys. Like you said, they're not looking 3 plays ahead. They're looking at, what do I need to do right now? That if I stack all these little wins together, play to play to play, block to block to block, whatever it may be, the summation of all that is the outcome that I'm looking at, whether it be in the game, whether it be in the season, or whether it be in my career.
Absolutely. Erik, you're cutting off it right here. So yeah, move your phone. There you go. Perfect. Okay. Well, one of the things that to dominate your performance in the pro mindset model, it's show up, it's build that performance bubble, and it's be in the moment. Those are the 3 components. So be in the moment is a big part of it. And I call that running through the smoke. You have to have a fireman mentality that you're running into. You've been trained. You've gone through all these exercises to run through the smoke, but you don't know if the building's going to collapse on you. You don't know if you're going to save somebody. You don't even know if you're wasting your time going in there. But can you run through the smoke without knowing what's on the other side? and have the courage to do what you've been trained to do without being mindful of all the potential outcomes. And I think as an athlete, the best ones, they're focused on their job right now, the play right now, the event right now. If you're in gymnastics, it's this. It's not the next one. If it's in track, it's this one. And if it's in football, you got to be dialed in on the play you're playing.
Yeah.
So, okay. In your opinion, based upon your curriculum, what does a high performance lifestyle or a high performance lifestyle system look like for elite athletes?
Yeah. So we break the game down into what we consider like the 4 coactive model. Okay. The 4 coactive model is technical, tactical, physical, and psychological. Each one of those categories has their own subcategories. So when we break those down as a loose definition, physical is everything related to your physical development, your speed, your power, your strength, your resiliency, your movement literacy, your nutrition, all of those things fall under physical, like your physical health. Mental, everything that falls under the psychological or mental is everything from like kind of the sports psychology, the psyche, the self-analysis, to adversity, resilience, mental toughness, competitiveness, drive, so on and so forth. When we look at the tactical side of things, that is the play style of the system that you're in. So tactical in the football realm would be, I am part of a pro style offense. I am part of a run and shoot offense. I'm part of a read option offense. And then technical is your ability to execute the demands of your specific position within the tactical framework. So can I run a slant? Can I down block? Can I waggle motion to choice route? Can I do all of those things that my sports skill requires me to do to be efficient in the tactical model? Now, I say all that to say you peel those back and we look just at the physical, because that's where my subject matter expertise is, right? To be able to have a really strong physical model, we need to make sure that recovery is good, and then specifically training is good, and then nutrition is good. And so we want to try to check those boxes any way we can. And so it comes from an appropriate management of volume and intensity, whether it's in the weight room with the more generalized work or on the field with the more specific work. It comes from making sure that we're doing the right things on the recovery side. So sleep, hydration, any like more specific recovery methods, and then it comes from, are we taking advantage of what we need to do from the nutrition side and refueling our body appropriately to be a high functioning machine. And then the last one that doesn't fall within that model is kind of to your point, do we have an appropriate support staff that is helping us move everything in the right direction? Because that's kind of like the end all environmental factor or the social side of things, that, are my parents on board, or have I cut, to your point, anything that's a non-essential, right? Do I have bad relationships that are distracting me from my end goal, as opposed to positive relationships that are keeping me on the right path? So the high performance lifestyle that supports like big achievers for these guys is multivariant or multidisciplinary, and needs to be addressed kind of on all factors. And as you can probably imagine, every player that you work with is going to be really good in some things and not great in others. And so we want to make them extremely well-rounded and balanced.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've discovered just in the last handful of years is the idea that, Erik, when you were in middle school, high school, and whatnot, you had that guy. Everybody's got that guy that said that you weren't big enough, you were not fast enough, you were not smart enough, you weren't going to make it because of X, Y, or Z. And it might have been a day where you showed up and you were just going through the motions. It might have been a day when you went to visit with your coach to say, hey, why am I not playing? And you couldn't understand in the 7th grade, while somebody else, that you loved the game more than they did, you worked harder than they did, you did everything more than they did, and they were playing and you weren't. And those things typically live in our subconscious. We don't think about them, we forget about them, and then just like when we get in we get in a hot kitchen, when we get under fire, that's when things are revealed. So what I see with athletes is when it's why does a track athlete sometimes scratch 3 times, on a high jump? Because they're under pressure. It's 6 inches less than their PR, but it's the pressure. Where'd the pressure come from? Either a thought, a distraction, a relationship. And distraction is not just like video games and not getting your sleep and girls or whatever it might be. It's also being attached to the outcome, being attached to the recognition you're going to get if you win this event. What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, I think there's two really interesting things that tie into this really well in terms of high achievers. One, in regards to high achievers, if you look into some of the research about the similarities between all high achievers, they find that somewhere along their journey, they were exposed to trauma, but the trauma was specific in terms of how intense it was, meaning that the trauma was enough to alert them and kind of change them fundamentally, but it wasn't so significant that their ability to react to that trauma led them to coping mechanisms that were negative, i.e., drug abuse, like emotional down spiral, or anything. So there's this really finite amount of trauma that high achievers have been exposed to, whether it's their coach sitting them or not playing them, embarrassment from a poor performance, being told you're not good enough, whatever that is. It could be specific or non-specific, but it's enough that it pushed them to the next level, but not so much that the way in which they dealt with it was a negative outcome. Again, substance abuse or otherwise, which I think is really, really unique, to the point that you made in regards to that. And then the second thing that I'll say is in regards to performance on the day. The other way that I would look at that in terms of pressure is your management of an arousal state. When you look at arousal is essentially a bell curve against performance. So more arousal doesn't mean better performance. At some point, there's a diminishing returns to your arousal where you're overstimulated and you feel like you're trying to do too much and you're trying to will your way into that situation. And so there's an optimal arousal state that leads into being in what we'd all kind of generally consider the flow state, where your performance is optimal. And that's different for everybody, but that's where you don't feel pressure, but you appreciate the pressure of the moment, right? Where you understand that you trust your training and it's not, because I've seen people scratch on the other side. They're under aroused. It's not important enough that they feel like they need to try and they can't get up for the event, so to speak. So it's interesting to see high performers all have had some sort of innate, traumatic events at some point in their life that improved them for the better, but wasn't so significant that it put them into a downward spiral from negative coping mechanisms. It made them more resilient. And then additionally, they do a really good job, whether consciously or subconsciously, of getting themselves into flow state and managing that arousal to performance kind of curve, so to speak.
Okay. Because you're a performance trainer and because resistance training is one of the methods you use to improve your athlete's strength.
Mm-hmm.
The right amount of trauma is a form of resistance.
Yeah.
And it makes you stronger. And so I think the thing that I've learned is that regardless of the amount of trauma, let's say you're in a car wreck and you're 9 years old and the doctor says you're never going to walk again, and that athlete ends up becoming an Olympic marathoner. Having a doctor tell you that you're never going to walk again is not a little bit of trauma.
Right.
That's the worst message you could ever hear.
Right.
And if you have a desire to run, that's the worst thing that the doc can say. So I think the question is, how do you heal from that, and how do you grow from that, and how do you turn that into motivation? And the way I've seen is guys reframe it. Athletes reframe it. So you take a situation, I don't care what it is, and you find out, you basically look at it and go, okay, this is how I've been looking at it, and I'm a victim because of that. Whatever, something said, something happened, whatever it may be. how can I change the composition of that trauma by making it for me as basically just reframe. You might have to forgive somebody.
Yeah.
If it's a relationship, you might have to forgive your dad or somebody like that. And if you can reframe it, it sets you free. If you don't reframe it, it holds you back. And then on the arousal curve, what I see is when the focus is outward, meaning who's the competition? How good are they? What's the scoreboard say? What's the weather? Then you might have a problem with motivation. But if you've got an inward view about can you be the best that God created you to be today in whatever you're doing, regardless of who you're doing it with or against, it's a different game.
Yep.
And so I think that if you can get the athletes to look inward to their purpose, to their goals, to being their best, they're less likely to have a flat day.
Sure.
But when you're looking, I can remember one of the most interesting moments in my mind when I played basketball was warm-ups. We'd be doing layups, and I wouldn't even be thinking about what I'm doing. I'm looking at the opposition to see who I've got to guard and how good they look. I was outward focused instead of inward focused. I'm gonna have to take a pause here for a second. I don't have any script. I'm just winging it.
Dude, it's fine on my end.
Okay.
No,
Go ahead.
kind of at that point, the one thing, I won't get too deep in this. The backstory is I basically grew up in a psychological experiment. My dad has an undergrad in psychology. He's got 2 master's degrees in psychology, one from Whitman, one from UCLA, and then he's got a doctorate in theology from Cal. He's the only non-medical professional on the international boards of health and human ethics for doctors, and he goes globally around to speak on ethics and mindset and things like that. And then my mom's a social worker, so she's got a master's degree in psychology as well. So you can imagine what my household was like growing up when you talk about something like mindset or you talk about things like psychology. I oddly feel like a unique qualification to speak on those topics. I say all that to say the interesting thing about the trauma comment for high performers is trauma in and of itself, the event itself, is only what we make it, to your point. So for some people, the trauma of the car accident could be perceived at a threshold significantly higher than somebody else. So that to say, perspective is subjective, and there's so much subjectivity to what defines that trauma moment. For an elite level player, his trauma moment that made him kind of flip the gear could have been something as little as, a 3rd grade coach telling him he wouldn't be anything. And that's all he needed. Where the other one could be I got in a car accident and I was never going to walk. And those were perceived as the same obscure unit of trauma, which is really interesting. So, to try to quantify what, for anybody listening to this being like, hey, how much trauma do I need to go through to be an elite level performer? It's hard to just quantify it. We just know that everybody who's elite level at some point in general has gone through something traumatic that has pushed them forward to that next level.
Well, and the other thing I would say, Eric, is that anybody that is in the NFL, let's say, that is genetically gifted off the charts, that hasn't faced that trauma yet,
right,
it's only a matter of time.
Right.
They're going to face it. And the question is, how are they going to respond to that I'll call it adversity instead of trauma, because they're going to face some adversity. Could be an injury, could be a demotion, could be getting overdrafted, could be not having being a first rounder and not getting your option year exercised by your organization, like a Chase Young right now for the Commanders, or
right.
now for 49ers.
Right.
But it's like, I don't know if we even know how somebody's going to respond if they've never faced that adversity before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that I see that is a game changer in the NFL is that when the scouts are evaluating players that have never gone through adversity, it's a crapshoot.
Yeah.
Because they don't know.
Well, I was going to say, to ask you a question, as an agent who's probably dealt with a lot of guys coming through the NFL Combine, I know teams, whether it's GMs or owners or coaches, they have their own ways to interview, but a lot of teams, from my understanding, leverage some sort of like actual, qualified behavioral interviewing specialist to like really kind of push, put the fire under their feet, so to speak, to kind of see and try to quantify this person's resilience to adversity. Do you have any comments or any anecdotes or stories on some of the crazy questions that they've asked some of your athletes through that process that just, put people on their head, so to speak?
Here's what I can share with you is that one of my clients is in the front offices, and he's the one that asks those questions.
Mm-hmm.
And he shared with me that he's looking for a growth mindset. So when they ask, like he's even shared with me that they'll ask an athlete, do you like math? Nobody likes math. Okay.
Right.
And so he says, no, I'm not really a big fan of math, because even if you like math, you don't want to say you do, because you think they're going to ask you a math question. When you say you don't, you're hoping they don't.
Right.
So then you'll ask them a question like, what's the square root of 9? Oh, I don't know. Well, you learned in the third grade. Everybody learned the square root of 9 in third grade. It's like, right. It's not a math problem. It's a memorization issue. And so when a player says, I don't know, they don't want those guys, because let's say, for example, it's a corner and he likes to play man-to-man, but they bring in a DC that wants to go zone more than man. What's that player going to do? Oh, I'm a cover guy. I'm a man press guy. I can't play cover 2. Well, so that's one way that they get a sneak preview about a guy's mindset, is by making him feel uncomfortable, finding out if he will accept the challenge or if he'll shut down. Mm-hmm. Because so many awesome athletes have a tendency to shut down.
Right.
And there's, like you said, their training program is going to be awesome, because no matter what it is, because they're so talented, it works for them.
Right.
Right. And so then when they get to the league and they got to compete, some of them can't compete. One of the most interesting things I noticed when I coached high school football was I was with a program that we won state 3 times out of 4 years when I was a coach, and it wasn't because of me. We had really talented players. We had really good coaches, but they hated to coach. And what I mean by that was they wanted to get to a running clock as fast as they could so they could stop coaching. And what that did for years, they dominated in the regular season, but when they got in the playoffs and they had to play against teams that were comparable, they struggled. And so one of my observations was, let's not get a running clock. Let's get comfortable being uncomfortable, having to coach when it's a close game. Because most of the time in that later part of the season, it's going to be a close game. And I see that same recipe in a lot of athlete mindsets. Man, if you got to compete, oh, bro, I'm good. But man, if I'm way better, I'm in.
Yeah.
If I'm not as good, I'm in. I got nothing to lose. I'm not expected to win. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would genuinely agree. I think, from the coaching standpoint, like I always talk about or use the idea that games are the opportunity to express your talent, where practice is the opportunity to develop your talent. And the difference is that during practice, it should be an environment where failure is okay, as long as it's in an effort to get better at the task at hand. And actually, from motor learning research, we found that there's an actual acceptable amount of failure that needs to happen to challenge the system to be able to make an adaptation to a new skill demand. So the loose example that I would use is like, if you are doing a drill for 10 reps, and if you can get that drill correct 8 out of 10 times, the drill is not challenging enough to challenge the system to need to make an adaptation. You're just demonstrating your current ability, but not developing it to the next level. So the error or the failure rate for improving motor learning is roughly 20 to 40%, meaning that if I'm really trying to get better at something, I need to have a drill that is complex or difficult enough that I have an error rate of 20 to 40%, or out of 10 times, 4 to 6 of those, or excuse me, 6 to 8 of those I get right, and the others I get wrong. You need that discrepancy so your body can make more neural networks to say, oh, that is the right answer. But if the failure rate is too high, then it's too ambiguous to know what is the right and what is the wrong. So I say that to say, to those guys, you're just wanting to get to a running clock is you just getting them to a place in which they're going to express their current level, but you don't want to spend the time actually developing them to get to that next level. And that's fine in the regular season, but once you go with someone that's toe-to-toe comparable, you're going to recognize that you didn't develop anything the whole year. And they're just as good as they are now as they were week 1.
1000% agree with you. And I would also say this is a lesson for coaches, especially like in sports where you can pair up players.
Yeah.
That if like one of the things that I noticed in youth football was a lot of coaches like to take the meanest, strongest, biggest, fastest, oldest guy that already had a beard against the guy that's underdeveloped, late bloomer, to show everybody what it looks like. Okay,
Right.
This is what it looks like to kill somebody, which serves no purpose because the big guy should win out. The little guy is not going to show up for practice the next week, and it demoralizes the whole team. Where if you take what I did when I coached was I took like talented athletes and paired them up. So the failure rate theoretically should be 50%. Because if you and me are very similar and we're both given 100% effort, you should win about half the time. I should win half the time. And guess what? I'm making you better and you're making me better. And right beside us, there's some other guys, maybe not as talented as us or maybe more talented than us, that are going through that same learning process because there is that built-in failure component.
Right. So now you come full circle and you say, okay, what's the pro mindset of a guy like a Cooper Kupp for long-term success and to get better year after year? Well, how about you come watch him do his skill work with me in the offseason? We start to quantify success and fail rates in the drills that he does for football. And I'm not claiming to know how to coach wide receivers on how to do anything. But what I am saying is I can help set up environments and leverage him as a subject matter expert in the sport, because he's the best wide receiver, one of the best wide receivers out there. He probably knows more about wide receiver than most of the world, probably fair to say. Make sure that he's challenging himself at a level that growth is still happening. So even last offseason when we were working together, we would do drills, and we get to the point where it's like, oh, that drill's too easy. That's a refinement drill. That's a touch-up drill. That's a pregame tune-up drill. Okay, what are the drills that we're doing for development drills? Right? So there's the drills and there's the practices and there's the, EDDs that you do every day to warm up, to refine, that build your confidence for the acute performance. But then there's the other subset of drills that we're doing that it's hard. I have to focus. I need to try. I need to be mentally and physically engaged, and I'm not going to get this right, but I'm going to be resilient enough to work through it to get to that next level of performance. And those are those developmental drills. And so the pro mindset is if you take Cooper Kupp and X wide receiver, other person on the field, and you watch them do their own skill practice, you'll watch Cooper Kupp fail more than the other guy because the other guy's only going to do the drills he's comfortable with, where Cooper Kupp's going to do the drills that he knows are going to drive him to get better.
I would say I love that, and I agree. I don't know Cooper. I just visited with him a few times. The thing I can tell you, though, is that the pro mindset overlay of what you just described is, can Cooper be fully present while he's doing the drills?
Yeah, 100%.
Can he bring everything that's for him with him? Can he block out, he's going to dinner at some Mexican restaurant with his wife later that day, or something else he's got to call his financial advisor or somebody else. Can he be fully present? And practicing that. And then from time to time, reviewing what his story is, what his
Right.
purpose is. And if you think about it, every coach does this, whether they realize it or not. They make tweaks to their culture. Head coaches make tweaks to their culture every single season, but they've got their fundamentals they stick to. Coaches that get maybe a little bit too long in the tooth, they stop changing it and they lose their locker room. But you've got it as an athlete, it's not just goals. It's what's your intention, what's your purpose, and what's your story, and how's it different from the previous seasons? Because once you do that, you can't perform except for in alignment with your story.
Sure.
And so if you change your story, eventually you're going to change your performance.
Sure.
Thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, I would completely agree. I think, you know, the unique aspect of the human experience is that we're always evolving, right? Whether it be our story or our efforts or otherwise. So you have to kind of lean into that a little bit as, you know, time goes on, and be okay with, like, you know, your story changing as long as you kind of have that foundation behind you. So yeah, I would completely agree.
I think the other thing that happens with elite athletes is circumstances are constantly changing. You know, they're on this journey to perform the best they can. They want to be compensated the best they can. And a lot of the elite guys are compensated eventually, and the running backs right now are struggling because they're not getting compensated. But once they get compensated, the fans, the locker room, their teammates, their coaches, the front office all change their expectations.
Right.
And what you did before was not good enough. That was good enough to get you the deal. Now you got to earn the deal.
Yeah.
And so what hurts players sometimes is they're surprised. They're caught off guard by the fact that, hey, what I did was great before. It's not great anymore. It's just good enough. And I had a young man with the Chiefs. It's been 20 years. He got paid a big deal. And I went in and met with one of the coaches, and he shared with my client and I, he's like, hey, what you did last year is now average. Let's see what you can do this year. And my client was just confused. And I was like a little bit caught off guard too, because I wasn't really prepared for it either. But it's like, since then I've learned that, you know, every time you do great, that becomes your new standard. And everybody wants to see you exceed your standard.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, at a slightly lower tier, I see that all the time with, you know, the kids that I work with at the high school level who put in the work to get to, you know, the Division I offer. And then they think it's that same amount of work that's going to get them to be able to play or suit up or travel, you know, or go from, you know, PWO to Scully guy at a Division I level. And that's just not the case, right? It's going to take an exorbitant amount more work to get to that next level after that. And I see a lot of kids kind of burn out or hang it up because they're like, oh, you know, for them, it was getting to the level and that was it. And then they kind of start to fall off, where the guys who really stick with it, it's like, okay, I worked really hard. I got to the, you know, sign with D1. Now I got to figure out what the next thing I have to do is to then be good at this level, to your point. So, you know, the expectation is always rising, especially if your goal is to be an elite level performer at whatever level you're at and then get to that next level.
Well, there's two places I see where elite athletes, whether they're college guys or pro guys, fail. You just described the college guy. It's getting the scholarship.
Right.
Is the goal.
Yeah.
It's not playing.
Right.
It's not making an impact. It's not being all conference. It's getting a scholarship because it gives you street cred in the locker room. It takes some pressure off your parents. Makes you feel like you've arrived. But that coaching staff can take it away. And at big programs, they will ask for it back if you're not producing. And then I think in the pros, the place where guys get deceived is getting drafted.
Mm-hmm.
They just want to get drafted. I just want to get drafted. I want to get my name called. And coaches don't care. If you're a no-rounder, 7th rounder, 4th rounder, they don't care. Can you help us win? And so I think as simple as that sounds, you would think all pro athletes know that. They don't. It catches them by surprise all the time.
So here's my question to you then in that regard. because it's pretty well established that a large amount of the 53-man rosters are built off of like unsigned free agents and guys who get opportunities like that. Do you think that part of that has to do with what you just mentioned, that guys work so hard for the event of getting drafted that then a lot of those draft picks fall flat? And this is not only because it's obviously multifactorial, but maybe because the means to the end was getting drafted and now they're there and they feel like they made it, but they don't recognize there's a whole host of work ahead of them. Where the undrafted guy always feels like he has to prove himself, so he's always striving for that next level of opportunity or effort or kind of climbing the ladder, so to speak.
No, that's absolutely accurate. And I would also add, Eric, that let's say you're a fifth rounder and you get, $180,000 signing bonus. That's not going to change your life. But if
Right.
you have a small stomach, especially after taxes, if you have a small stomach, you feel a little full.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I've arrived. Where the undrafted guy is getting $2,000, $5,000, on a rare occasion they'll get some of the paragraph 5 guaranteed, but it's like they have to go get it.
Mm-hmm.
The draft pick already got a little bit. So I had a young man who was a seventh rounder a handful of years ago. He was a tight end, and the organization also had an undrafted tight end fighting for one spot. My guy ends up on the practice squad. The undrafted guy ends up on the 53. And I know the reason why. My guy was just excited to get drafted, even though we talked about it. In his mind, deep down in his soul, his badge of success was getting drafted. He didn't like football anymore. It had beaten him up. He had some injuries. It wasn't, I don't think it was his primary dream moving forward. But he wasn't telling anybody. But I could see it. I could feel it.
Right.
Unfortunately, you don't find that out until after you get to know him, after you're working with him, not before you sign him.
Right. And again, I'm not saying that's, the only reason, I don't know, but it is interesting to think from a mindset standpoint that may be part of the reason why you might not see as lucrative of a outcome or output from the draftable guys as you would expect based off their talent and production and status being drafted, coming out, so to speak.
I think I'll add one more thing. Seventh rounders typically have one trait that is off the charts. It's either height, it's weight, it's speed, it's some natural part of their skill set that you just can't coach. And so teams will take shots in the seventh round.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go get this guy because he runs a 4.3. We can't coach speed, can't catch, can't adjust to the ball, can't make contested catches, all those types of things. And they're thinking they can change him, and he doesn't change. And then you got this guy that runs a 4.5 every day that can do it all. And the 4.3 guy can only run a 4.3 when it's perfect weather and he's feeling good and he doesn't have a man press coverage on him. And he's not going to adjust, right? So it's like 4.5 is faster than 4.3, except where there's off coverage and it's a great day and he's feeling great.
Right. Yeah, 100%.
Hey, would you like to add anything to this commentary about EForce Sports, about what makes you special, how do you get the best out of your athletes besides just the curriculum that you have? Just to kind of share with the people that you might share this with that may listen.
Not necessarily. I think I feel pretty good about kind of how it was interwoven through this podcast, and I think a lot of our core tenets kind of come through that. So, I feel pretty good.
One final question.
Sure.
So, what was the biggest obstacle you had in performance, given the fact that your father had the credentials that he had, and he probably shared some wisdom with you at a very young age, at a much deeper level than anybody else you competed with?
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, knowing that my dad had a gazillion degrees in higher education, including a doctorate, and was extremely is this extremely established in his own right, in his own profession. Coming up through school, I have pretty severe dyslexia. And so I was in a lot of, alternative classes, supportive classes. Academics really wasn't my strong suit growing up. And in some aspects that was difficult, right? To be pulled out of class, to have someone read the test for you. And it wasn't for a lack of IQ. It was for one, a lack of interest in the curriculum, and two, just like a minor processing error, so to speak. So it's not that I wasn't smart. It's just like, I couldn't process it to get it to where it needed to go. So I say all that to say, he and my mom as well were super supportive in their own ways about kind of finding my unique skill set. And what that led me to find is that although I was at a disadvantage for processing, I'm at a significant advantage for memorization. And so the adversity of learning how to cope with being a slow processor in school led me to find a really unique skill set in really, really good memorization. So while it maybe takes me twice as long to comprehend something, whether it's reading or writing or otherwise, once it's there, it's there. And I don't forget it. And, you can ask a lot of my colleagues, like, I can rattle off the PubMed IDs of articles and lead authors and things like that as if I read them today and I've read them a decade ago, out of the only necessity of not having to read something again because it takes so long. And so I say all that to say, knowing my dad is an academic, being able to have his support through that process and not feel the obligation to be a studious academic like him, but more so find the intrinsic motivation to be studious in my own way and academic, had then led me to finding my way into not only being really successful academically in college, but now also being a professor at a university teaching courses in exercise science. And that was all kind of inoculated indirectly and subconsciously. I mean, I'm sure he's got every study and reason and whatnot under the sun. But, growing up, I would have never recognized it, at face value. But yeah, I think that was a big one for me is struggling with academics and having kind of this perception of, being a really studious, family, but then having a support system in a way that nudged me in the right direction and let me lean into my strengths to kind of find my own intrinsic motivation to be studious in my own right, through the long term.
That's awesome. Well, that's an example of finding a way. I mean, if you have a passion for something and you have a will to win and a will to compete, I mean, God gives us all different talents, different obstacles, different challenges. Everybody's got them.
Right.
And, if you look at some of I love the Olympics, absolutely love the Olympics. The stories they tell, nobody was born on third base, had a silver spoon their whole life. Those guys don't make it to the Olympics.
Right.
It's always the guys that were born, they weren't even born in the stadium. They were out in the parking lot and they had to scratch and claw for everything they got.
Right.
And they it's very interesting if you would take some of the elite and say, hey, in the third grade, were you the best? Some of them are going to say, yeah, I was. Some are going to say, no. Michael Jordan's, infamous for getting cut from his freshman high school basketball team. That stuff's not unusual. So
Right.
for those, if anybody out there is listening and it's a young athlete and you're in a situation where you're not in the place that you were hoping to be, you're not getting recognized for the talent that you think you have, and perhaps your coaches don't even see you like you see you, you just got to keep going. Just can't quit. Because in a matter of time, it's going to manifest, it's going to show up. So, Well, Erik, I want to thank you for being on Pro Mindset today. How can the listeners and viewers find you?
Yeah, well, one, Craig, appreciate the time, as always, just to kind of, wrap back and forth with a professional like yourself. In terms of finding me, you can look at EForceSports.com if you want to learn more about the organization in which I work for, or you can just follow me on any of my, personal social medias. If you just look up Erik Jernstrom, it's a pretty unique spelling in terms of a last name. You'll be able to find me, whether that's Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram. So those are probably the best outlets.
Erik, thank you very much. It's Craig Doman, the host of Pro Mindset Podcast. I want to thank you for listening or watching today's show. And you can catch us every week on the normal social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and all the listening podcast platforms. I hope you enjoyed today's show. And more importantly, I hope you gained a pro mindset insight. Please be sure to rate and review Pro Mindset Podcast. And I look forward to catching up with you on our next show.